Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really immersing ourselves in a philosophy that you could argue practically defined the modern self-empowerment movement. We're talking about the revolution sparked by foundational texts like Unlimited Power and, of course, Awaken the Giant Within.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
We've gathered, well, quite a stack of sources, the core texts, obviously, but also looking into the psychological frameworks they draw on things like NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, and applied behavioral science.
Right.
And our mission today really is to cut through maybe some of the hype, the big seminar energy, and get right to the essential core. What are the actual practical psychological tools here, the ones designed to help you transform, raw potential into what the philosophy calls unlimited power?
It's interesting because when you do strip away let's say, the performance aspect, the massive events, the core idea, the assertion of this whole philosophy, it kind of boils down to one thing, doesn't it?
It really does.
If you can consciously manage your inner state, how you feel moment to moment, and crucially, if you can fundamentally shift your core beliefs about yourself, about what's possible, then you can actually reshape your external reality. It's a huge claim.
It is a huge claim, but it's presented as a systematic one. It's not just, think positive and good things happen.
Yeah.
It's framed much more around applied psychology, a relentless focus on the mechanisms. How does this actually work?
So the question for you listening is, how do you actually do that? How mechanically can you make that profound inner shift that's being promised?
That's what we're digging into.
Okay, let's unpack this. So if we're aiming for unlimited power, we probably need to start with what we're even building towards. What does success look like in this framework?
Exactly. And the discussion really has to kick off with defining success, because the sources right from the start challenge that conventional idea. Success isn't just accumulating wealth or hitting a certain job title and then stopping.
Right, not a finish line.
No, absolutely not. Robbins defines success fundamentally as an ongoing process. It's about continuous growth, constant evolution.
That's a really important reframing, isn't it? It shifts the goal entirely. It's not about arriving somewhere, it's about being in motion.
Precisely. Success is seen as continuous growth across multiple dimensions: emotional, social, spiritual, physical, financial, all of it. And the implication is, if you stop growing in any of these key areas, well, by this definition, you're effectively stagnant. It doesn't matter how much external stuff you've piled up.
So it's about constant forward momentum. The only real failure then is just stopping, failing to grow.
That's the idea, which leads directly to the next really critical distinction the sources make: the difference between just knowing stuff, intellectual knowledge, and actually doing something with it. Applied action.
Yeah, and we live in a society that puts a huge premium on information, on acquiring knowledge.
We do. But this philosophy takes a very, very hard line here. The sources often quote thinkers like Thomas Huxley, who pointed out ages ago that the real essence of life isn't just knowing things, it's action, it's application.
Right.
You can read every single book on business or psychology or fitness, but if you don't actually apply the tools, if you don't take concrete, informed steps based on that knowledge, well, then the knowledge itself is basically inert, useless, practically speaking.
So wisdom isn't just knowing, it's knowing applied. I think Seneca talked about this too, didn't he? That studying shouldn't just be about collecting facts, but about using them to improve how you actually live. Otherwise, yeah, that self-help shelf just becomes a very expensive decoration.
Exactly, the utility problem. And the proposed solution to this problem within this framework is the principle of modeling. If knowledge needs action, how do you figure out which actions to take?
You look for someone who's already getting the results you want.
Precisely. The idea that success leaves clues. If someone else has achieved something remarkable, the theory goes, it's not usually down to just luck or some mystical talent. It's likely a replicable process.
A process built on specific patterns of thinking, feeling, and crucially, acting.
Yes. And the goal of modeling isn't simply to imitate like a parrot. It's more like reverse engineering.
Right.
You're trying to understand the underlying structure, their core beliefs, their physiology, their specific strategies.
So you can adopt that framework yourself.
Right. The aim is to give you the tools to first replicate those successful patterns, which accelerates your own learning massively. Then, once you got a handle on it, you can start adapting and creating your own unique strategies for achieving your goals. It builds resilience because you're starting with something proven.
It sounds quite structured, almost mechanical in a way. But underpinning this whole system is this really powerful, almost spiritual belief about the human mind, this inflexible law of mind and expectation.
Ah, yes, this is absolutely foundational. You see echoes of this in Earl Nightingale, Napoleon Hill, many others. The core premise is that your mind holds incredible untapped riches, and it functions like fertile soil. It will grow whatever seed you plant in it.
Good or bad.
Good or bad, it doesn't judge the seed. It just grows what's planted most consistently.
And the sources point out this huge paradox, don't they, about how little we often value this incredible resource, the mind. Because it comes as standard equipment, free at birth.
Exactly. Because it's free, we tend not to place much value on it. The suggestion is we operate on maybe, 10% of our actual mental capacity?
Using this amazing supercomputer
For little jobs, as the source material puts it. Worrying about traffic, complaining, gossiping. Instead of directing it towards the big important ones like consciously designing the life we want to live, it's the ultimate example of taking something limitless for granted.
Which brings us to that really strong assertion. The law of mind is described as being as inflexible, as reliable as the law of gravity. What does that kind of absolute inflexibility really imply, especially when, let's be honest, we see people plant good intentions all the time and still harvest, well, failure.
It implies the law is always working, whether you're consciously using it or not. The source material states it very directly. We literally become what we think about. So if you consistently plant thoughts of limitation, fear, self-doubt, the mind, acting as that neutral field, faithfully returns those limitations manifested as your reality.
So law isn't like a magic wand, just wish fulfillment. It sounds more like a commitment amplifier.
That's a good way to put it. If I truly definitively plant a goal in my mind, the law says there's no way it cannot eventually become reality. But, and this is the crucial part, that's where action and absolute commitment come in.
Right, the follow-through.
Exactly. The sources are crystal clear. The commitment has to be absolute, unwavering. Failure doesn't happen because the law breaks. Failure happens, according to this philosophy, when your commitment wavers or when the thought you planted isn't actually your dominant thought. Maybe fear or doubt is stronger. But if the law holds true and you maintain that absolute dominant focus on the desired outcome, your subconscious mind supposedly starts to organize everything, your perceptions, your actions, the resources you notice to align with achieving that goal. You literally start to see opportunities and solutions that were invisible before.
So the failure isn't in the law itself, it's in the inconsistency of the person applying it, the planter, not the soil.
That's the core assertion.
Okay, so if we accept that our dominant thoughts shape our reality, the next logical question is, why do people react so differently to the same things? Why do two people face the exact same challenge or hear the exact same message and have completely different experiences and outcomes?
Yeah, that brings us squarely into the fascinating territory of subjective perception and what the sources call internal filters. Basically, everyone's running slightly different internal software.
Right.
People react differently because they're processing the information, a job loss, a success, a criticism through their unique set of internal programs. And this is why effective communication, whether you're trying to influence yourself or someone else, really hinges on understanding and addressing people in their right key, so to speak.
And finding that right key means getting a handle on their metaprograms. Now, these sound quite technical, concepts often drawn from NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. How can we define metaprograms in a way that's easy to grasp?
Think of metaprograms as deep, usually unconscious psychological settings. They're like the preference settings in your operating system. They dictate how you sort information, what you naturally pay attention to, what motivates you, how you make decisions.
So there are these pervasive internal filters that shape almost everything, from big things like career choices down to how we handle a simple disagreement.
Pretty much, yeah. They influence how we interpret experiences. And understanding these filters, the sources argue, is vital for boosting your effectiveness in communication, in business, in relationships, even in understanding yourself better. Because you stop assuming everyone sees the world exactly like you do.
You start speaking their language, addressing their reality instead of just yours.
Exactly. So let's dive into a couple of the key ones. The first one, which is fundamental to understanding motivation, is the toward versus away from orientation.
This sounds relatively simple on the surface, but the implications seem quite profound.
They really are. The basic idea is that people are fundamentally motivated by one of two primary directions. Either moving toward things they desire, pleasure, goals, positive outcomes, or moving away from things they want to avoid, pain, problems, negative consequences.
Most people probably have a bit of both, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's usually a blend. But often, one orientation is more dominant, especially in certain contexts. And the source material really emphasizes identifying that dominant driver.
Okay, let's make this practical. Say I'm a manager and I need to get an employee to adopt some new, maybe complicated software system. How does knowing their meta program toward or away from change how I approach them?
Okay, great example. If your employee is strongly toward-oriented, you focus entirely on the positive payoff. You'd say things like, look, mastering this system is going to free up probably 2 hours of your week. It'll let you take on those higher profile projects we talked about. And honestly, it's a key step towards that promotion you're aiming for. You paint a vivid picture of the gain, the aspiration.
Got it. All about the benefits, the future rewards. But what if they're primarily an away from person? That kind of aspirational pitch might just wash over them.
Exactly. It won't have the same leverage. For the away from person, you need to flip the script. You focus on the problems they'll avoid. So you might say, okay, adopting this system now is crucial to head off the risk of data non-compliance penalties that are coming down the line. Plus, it'll eliminate all those frustrating manual entry errors you've been dealing with, and frankly, it prevents the risk of being left behind when the new corporate standards are fully implemented next quarter.
So you're highlighting the pain points it solves, the risks it mitigates.
Precisely. You tailor your entire approach, persuasion, goal setting, even giving advice based on whether they're moving towards pleasure or away from pain. You push their specific motivational button, which naturally drives better engagement and results because it resonates with their core wiring.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, what's the second key meta program you mentioned? The internal versus external frame of reference. This sounds like it's about where we get our sense of validation from.
That's exactly right. This meta program defines where someone's sense of authority or validation comes from. Do they look inside themselves or do they look outside?
So, an external reference person.
An external reference person relies heavily on feedback and validation from outside themselves to know if they've done a good job or achieved something worthwhile. They need the praise from the boss, the good grades, the public recognition, maybe seeing their salary compared to market rates. They need those external metrics to confirm their internal sense of accomplishment or value.
Which means potentially they could do fantastic work, but if nobody notices and praises them, they might actually feel like they failed or at least feel undervalued, even if logically they know the work was good.
That can do the internal struggle for someone strongly external. Conversely, you have the internal referencer. These individuals primarily trust their own internal judgment, their gut feeling, their sense of satisfaction or achievement.
So external praises, nice, maybe, but not necessary for them to feel successful.
Exactly. You could shower an internal referencer with awards, give them a huge bonus, tell them everyone loves their work, but if they don't feel, deep down, that they met their own personal standard, they'll likely discount all that external validation. It just doesn't land with the same weight.
Wow. That completely changes how you'd approach giving feedback or setting goals or even trying to persuade someone. If I'm working with, say, an artist who's highly internally referenced, critiquing their work based on popular opinion is probably pointless.
Worse than pointless, it might even make them defensive or suspicious. If you try to lead an internal referencer with, but everyone else thinks this is great, they might just dig their heels in. You need to provide them with the data, the logic, the principles, the standards information they can process against their own internal criteria to make their own judgment.
Whereas the external referencer would likely thrive on clear, measurable, perhaps even public feedback and recognition.
Absolutely. Knowing this orientation gives you incredible leverage in communication. You're tailoring the evidence you provide to match their validation strategy.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me. Once you start seeing the world through these filters, recognizing that reality is so subjective based on these internal programs, it opens up this possibility. Can you consciously change the filters? Or at least change how you react to things by changing the frame? That sounds like the power of reframing.
That's exactly what reframing is about. It's a cornerstone psychological tool in this philosophy. It starts with the premise that, okay, external events happen, facts are facts. A relationship ends, you lose a job, you make a mistake. Those are the data points.
But the meaning we attach to those facts, that's not fixed.
Not at all. The meaning is entirely dynamic, completely
Playful.
influenced by the frame, the context, the perspective we choose to put around that fact. So if a relationship ends and your current frame is, I'm a complete failure at love, that factual event becomes interpreted as a personal catastrophe.
So reframing is the conscious act of changing that context, changing the frame you put around the picture, which then changes the meaning of the picture itself.
Precisely. You don't deny the event happened. You change the label you put on it, the story you tell yourself about it. Instead of framing the relationship ending as failure, you could reframe it as valuable data collection on what you need in a partner, or maybe as a necessary clearing of space to allow for something better suited to you to enter your life.
It's the difference between an interpretation that shuts you down and one that empowers you to learn and move forward.
Exactly. It transforms a potentially crippling psychological blow into an adaptive learning opportunity. It's about cultivating mental flexibility, which is seen as key to personal development and resilience.
All right, so we've talked about the mind's operating system, these meta programs, and the core philosophy, the law of mind. Now, let's get into some really practical tools for controlling your state in the moment. This brings us to anchoring. It sounds a bit technical, maybe from NLP, but isn't this something that happens to us naturally all the time anyway?
Oh, absolutely. Anchoring is basically creating a conditioned response, Pavlov style, but for your own emotions and states. It's the process of linking a specific, unique stimulus is something you see, hear, or often most powerfully, something you feel, like a specific touch to a particular emotional state or mental response.
And we definitely experience negative anchors without even realizing it. Maybe a certain song reminds you of a breakup and instantly brings you down, or the smell of disinfectant takes you back to a hospital visit.
Or even just the tone of voice someone uses can instantly trigger feelings of stress or defensiveness if it resembles a past negative experience. Those are powerful, often completely unconscious negative anchors firing off.
So the goal here within this self-empowerment framework is to flip that, to consciously install positive anchors.
That's exactly the idea. To create triggers that reliably launch you into resourceful states like confidence, calm, or focus. Now, for an anchor to be really effective, the sources highlight three crucial elements.
Okay, what are they?
First, the intensity of the state you want to anchor. It needs to be high. You can't weakly feel confident and expect a strong anchor. You need to be fully immersed in that feeling, really amplifying it when you set the anchor.
Makes sense. You need strong ingredients for a strong result. What's second?
Second is the timing. This is critical. You need to apply the stimulus, the anchor itself, the touch, the sound, whatever it is, precisely when that desired state is reaching its absolute peak intensity. Not before it gets strong and not after it starts to fade, right at the apex.
Okay, peak intensity, precise timing, and the third element.
Third is the uniqueness of the stimulus, the anchor itself. It can't be something you do randomly all the time, like, say, scratching your nose or folding your arms, because then the anchor gets diluted, fired off accidentally. It needs to be a specific, distinct action you wouldn't normally do.
Like what? Give me an example.
Maybe squeezing a particular knuckle on your left hand in a very specific way, or pressing two fingers firmly onto a particular spot on your wrist. Something unique that you can replicate exactly, but won't trigger by accident.
Right, so it stays potent because it's reserved only for triggering that state. Okay, so for someone listening who wants to try this, what's the actionable step? How do you actually create a reliable, positive anchor, say, for confidence?
Okay, practical steps. First, you need to induce the state. So think of a time you felt incredibly confident, totally unstoppable. Really step back into that memory, see what you saw, hear what you heard, and most importantly, feel that confidence flooding through you. Amplify it. Make it intense.
Okay, got the feeling dialed up.
Now, as that feeling peaks, as it hits its maximum intensity, you apply your unique stimulus. Fire off your anchor, squeeze that knuckle, press that spot on your wrist, whatever you chose. Hold it for a few seconds while the feeling is strong.
And then?
Then you release the anchor and kind of shake off the state. Maybe think of something neutral for a moment. They call it a break state. Then you repeat the process. Recall the confidence, intensify it, fire the anchor at the peak. You probably want to do this maybe 5 to 10 times, maybe over a couple of different sessions, to really wire that connection strongly in your nervous system.
So you're conditioning yourself, basically.
Exactly. Once it's installed properly, that unique touch becomes like a button, a remote control. In a future situation where you need a boost of confidence, you just discreetly fire off that anchor, and boom, the feeling should come rushing back, allowing you to manage your state proactively in real time.
That's a powerful tool. Managing your state like that using anchoring seems like it would give you the psychological fuel needed for the next big piece, which the sources emphasize over and over. The power of making a real decision and committing to it.
Absolutely. The philosophy is unequivocal on this. Genuine change, lasting change, begins at the moment of true decision. And there's a big distinction made between merely wanting something and actually deciding to have it.
How so?
Wanting is passive. It's a wish, a preference. Deciding, in this context, means something much stronger. It means cutting off all other possibilities. It means committing 100% to making it happen, no matter what.
And if we connect this back to the law of mind, we discussed the idea that your dominant thoughts create your reality. Then making that kind of definitive, clear decision to plant a specific goal in your mind, that becomes arguably the single most important action you can take.
It really does. Because if that law is inflexible, then once the decision is absolute and the focus is unwavering, the achievement must eventually become reality. But that level of decision requires uncompromising commitment. Just saying you've decided isn't enough.
Which is where strategies come in to bolster that commitment, right? Like the compelling one-year goal exercise.
Exactly. This is a very structured approach designed specifically to prevent that powerful decision from just fizzling out into another vague wish. It forces you to get laser-focused on the single most important goal you want to achieve in the next year, in one specific area of your life.
One goal, 1 year. Okay.
And then, crucially, it makes you build massive emotional leverage around that goal to guarantee you follow through, even when things get tough.
Emotional leverage. How does that work?
Through something called the commitment paragraph. This isn't just writing down the goal. It's crafting a detailed, emotionally charged contract with yourself about why this goal is a must. You have to articulate, in writing, 3 key things.
Okay, what's the first?
First, you have to detail exactly why you are absolutely unequivocally committed to achieving this specific goal within the next year. This lays down the core rationale, the foundational why.
Got it. The logical and emotional reasons for commitment.
Second is the positive pull. What will you gain by achieving it? You need to vividly describe the benefits, the rewards, the feelings of pride, accomplishment, freedom, whatever it is that achieving this goal will bring you. This taps into that toward motivation we talked about.
Makes sense. Paint the pleasure. And the third element?
The third element is the negative push, and this is often the most powerful. You must detail, again vividly, what you will miss out on if you don't achieve this goal within the year. What pain will you experience? What regret will you feel? What opportunities will be lost forever? This taps directly into the away from motivation.
So you're using both pleasure and pain as drivers. That focus on the potential pain of not achieving it, the regret, that sounds incredibly motivating. It creates this internal pressure to avoid that future pain.
Precisely. The reasons, both positive and negative, have to be strong enough, compelling enough, that they override the inevitable obstacles, the moments of doubt, the sheer inertia of staying comfortable. It essentially makes the perceived cost of inaction significantly higher than the perceived cost of taking massive action. It locks in the commitment.
Okay, so we have these powerful internal tools, understanding metaprograms, using anchoring, making committed decisions with leverage. But how do we translate all this internal work into consistent, observable daily behavior? The sources offer a pretty intense practical challenge for this, don't they? The 30-day experiment in proactivity.
They do. It's framed as paying the price of success. The underlying premise is that achieving significant goals requires first fully accepting that most of our limitations aren't external, they're self-imposed. They come from our thinking.
So to control your life, you have to start by controlling your thoughts.
Exactly. And this 30-day experiment is designed as a kind of mental boot camp, a crucible, to force that conscious control over your thinking until it starts to become more automatic. And let me tell you, the sources make it clear, this is much harder in practice than it sounds on paper.
A full month of rigorously managing your internal world and external actions. What are the specific steps involved in this 30-day test?
There are a few key actions. The first one is about constant mental vigilance, thought replacement. For 30 days, you must consciously force yourself to think positively about any problem or challenge that comes up. The moment a negative or limiting thought enters your mind, you have to immediately consciously replace it with a mental image of your desired positive outcome, your achieved goal.
Wow, that requires relentless self-monitoring, like policing your own mind 24/7.
It does. It's about interrupting those negative patterns before they gain momentum. The second and third steps are focused on external action and value creation. Second, for 30 days, you must consistently do more than you have to do, specifically in your work or contribution. Give more value than you're currently being compensated for. The philosophy here is that you can't really justify or expect an increase in reward, whether it's pay, responsibility, opportunity, unless you are already delivering value that exceeds your current station. You essentially earn the promotion before you get it.
So preemptive value creation. And the third step.
Third, Consciously strive to improve the quality and quantity of your work every single day during this period. Find ways to be slightly better, more efficient, more valuable each day. The argument is that this continuous improvement guarantees an eventual increase in your rewards, either from your current situation or because you'll attract better opportunities due to your enhanced skills and reputation.
Right. Compound interest on effort. And the final action step for the 30 days seems to loop back to that law of mind, focusing on the goal itself.
Exactly. You need to work steadily towards your primary goal, but do it in a relaxed, positive, expectant manner. Visualize the successful achievement of your goal vividly every morning when you wake up and every night before you sleep. Feel the feelings of having already achieved it.
That relax part seems key. Not desperate striving, but confident expectation.
Yes, the idea isn't to obsess anxiously over how every little step will happen. You maintain absolute clarity and focus on what the end result with unwavering positive expectancy. The how, the path, the resources will supposedly start to reveal themselves as you maintain that committed positive focus aligned with the law of mind.
This intense focus on individual action is central, but the sources also acknowledge we don't operate in a vacuum, right? We're fundamentally interdependent.
Absolutely. That's a crucial point. We rely on others for almost everything: our jobs, our homes, the food we eat, the services we use. And the philosophy suggests a kind of golden rule applies here. If you expect excellent service, cooperation, or value from others, you need to provide the same in return. Give that baker's dozen for the money, metaphorically speaking. Go the extra mile.
And the key mechanism suggested for navigating this interdependence effectively is building strong communication, specifically through rapport.
Yes, rapport is presented as the foundation of all effective communication and influence. It's the ability to step into someone else's world, to connect with them on an unconscious level, making them feel understood and comfortable with you. And the primary technical tool for building rapport is pacing and leading, which again draws heavily from NLP.
Okay, pacing. This involves mirroring the other person subtly.
That's the core of it. Pacing means consciously, subtly matching aspects of the other person's behavior. It's not about mimicking them, obviously, which would be weird.
Right, that would be creepy.
Exactly. It's about subtly aligning with their physiology. You might gently match their posture. Are they leaning forward or back? Match the general tempo and tone of their voice. Are they speaking quickly and excitedly or slowly and deliberately? Match their common gestures or even their breathing rate, if you can observe it.
So it's about creating a sense of similarity, of being in sync on a nonverbal level.
Precisely. It sends an unconscious signal. I'm like you. I understand you. We're on the same wavelength. When done effectively and respectfully, it bypasses conscious resistance and creates an almost immediate, often unexplained feeling of trust and connection.
Okay, so you establish that connection through pacing. Then what's leading?
Once you feel that rapport has been established, you'll often sense a shift. Maybe they start matching you slightly. Then you can gently transition to leading. Leading involves subtly shifting your own communication style or direction based on what you've learned about their preferences, like their metaprograms, and where you want the interaction to go.
And because you've built that foundation of trust through pacing.
They are much more likely to unconsciously follow your lead. You can then gently guide the conversation, shift their perspective, or move towards a mutually beneficial outcome more easily. It's presented as a very sophisticated, respectful form of influence, built on understanding rather than manipulation.
Maintaining this kind of focus and applying these tools consistently, though, requires dealing with our own internal roadblocks, that inner critic, the voice of self-doubt. The sources mention things like the internal censor or the perfectionist that can block us.
Yes, absolutely. These are seen as major sources of internal interference, especially when it comes to creativity, taking risks, or pursuing big goals. The censor is that voice that shuts down ideas before they're even fully formed. That's stupid. You can't do that. The perfectionist demands everything be flawless before you even start, which often leads to never starting at all.
So how does this philosophy suggest we deal with that? Do we just try to eliminate self-doubt?
Interestingly, no. The mindset shift offered is quite different. The point isn't necessarily to overcome or eliminate self-doubt entirely, because the reality is almost everyone who achieves anything significant, anyone who creates something new, experiences doubt. It's part of the human condition, especially when stretching yourself.
So if you can't eliminate it, you learn to live with it.
You learn to move through it. You learn to acknowledge the doubt. Okay, fear, I hear you, but you refuse to let it sit in the driver's seat. You do the work anyway. The focus shifts from achieving a doubt-free state, which might be impossible, to developing the courage to act despite the doubt.
How does that work practically?
By focusing relentlessly on the process rather than fixating only on the final product. When you value the process, you start to see mistakes and setbacks, not as proof of your inadequacy, but as essential parts of learning, as data gathering. Perfectionism thrives in the dark, fueled by shame. But when you just keep doing the work, even messy work, you bring light to the process, you learn, you adapt, and the power of that internal critic starts to diminish.
That's a really useful reframe in itself. Finally, just to give a sense of how holistic this approach was intended to be in the original books, we should probably briefly touch on the fact that it wasn't just about mindset and psychology. There were specific health and physical vitality components too, right?
Oh, definitely. The philosophy strongly argues that peak physical health and energy are absolutely necessary components of achieving your potential and wielding unlimited power. You can't have a powerful mind in a depleted body, essentially.
And there were some specific, maybe even controversial at the time, dietary theories included.
Yes, particularly in unlimited power. Robbins dedicated significant sections to his views on optimal diet. For example, he strongly advocated for fruit, calling it perhaps the most perfect food for humans. His reasoning was based on its high water content, ease of digestion, and ability to provide quick, clean energy while aiding the body's natural cleansing processes.
Maximizing vitality, essentially.
Right. And he also directly challenged some very common nutritional beliefs of the era, particularly around protein.
What was the argument there?
He countered the widespread belief, still prevalent today in some circles, that very high protein intake, especially from animal sources, is essential for strength and health. He argued, quite forcefully, that excessive protein consumption could actually be detrimental, potentially contributing to things like acidosis, taxing the kidneys, and ultimately hindering long-term health and vitality.
Interesting. So including these physical strategies really underscores that the concept of mastery in this philosophy was meant to be total mind, emotions, and body.
Exactly. It was presented as an integrated system for optimizing the entire human machine. Hashtag outro.
Okay, so let's try to wrap this up. What does this all mean? We've covered a lot of ground here. The fundamental need to prioritize action over just accumulating knowledge, the way our internal metaprograms act as filters shaping our reality, the nuts and bolts of using psychological anchoring for instant state control.
And, critically, the immense power that comes from making a truly committed decision, backed up by strong emotional leverage, both the pleasure of success and the pain of failure, particularly using that compelling one-year goal framework.
Right. I think the biggest takeaway, the thread running through all of this, is that personal power, as defined here, isn't really about luck or circumstance. It's presented as the direct result of conscious choice and, maybe most importantly, relentless focus. Where you direct your attention determines your experience.
Absolutely. And to really drive that point home, maybe we can touch on a fascinating psychological concept that relates to decision-making and focus. The idea of the two selves. You have the experiencing self and the remembering self.
Yeah, Daniel Kahneman talks about this. The experiencing self is the one living life moment by moment, feeling the pain, the pleasure, the boredom.
Right, but the remembering self is the storyteller. It's the one that looks back, constructs a narrative of our lives, decides what was important, what it all meant. It's the editor, basically.
And the strange thing is, the remembering self often has more influence on our future decisions than the experiencing self does, even when it seems illogical.
Exactly. And the sources we've discussed today imply that understanding this split is key to making better choices. Think about those studies, like the famous cold hand experiment. People had to put their hand in painfully cold water.
Right.
In one condition, the pain was intense, but relatively brief. In another condition, the pain was just as intense for the same duration, but then they added a short extra period at the end where the water was still cold, but slightly less painfully so.
So the second condition involved more total pain overall because the hand was in the cold water for longer. The experiencing self suffered more.
Logically, yes, more total duration of pain. Yet, when asked which trial they'd prefer to repeat, people often chose the longer one, the one with more total pain. Why?
Because the memory was better. The ending was slightly less awful, so the remembering self constructed a narrative of diminishing pain, which felt preferable to the memory of abrupt, intense pain ending suddenly.
Precisely. They literally chose more actual suffering for the experiencing self in order to provide the remembering self with a slightly better story, a less traumatic memory. It shows just how much we're driven by the narrative we create, sometimes even at the expense of our actual lived experience.
So the power that Robbins talks about, the power to shape your destiny, is really about consciously aligning those two selves,
Yeah,
directing both your immediate experience and your long-term narrative towards the reality you are deliberately choosing to build.
that seems to be the implication. It's about taking control of the story by taking control of your focus and your state.
Mm-hmm.
Which leads us to the final challenge for you, the listener.
Okay.
If we accept the premise, even just as the thought experiment, that the law of nature regarding focus is absolute, that you do literally become what you predominantly think about, and that your limitations are largely self-imposed, then the question becomes, what is one goal, one outcome currently sitting in your impossible category
Yeah.
that you've been hesitant to truly commit to? What is that one giant goal that you will now choose to plant definitively in the fertile ground of your mind, starting today? Plant it with the absolute conviction, the unwavering focus, that just like gravity, the law assures there is truly no way it cannot eventually become your reality if your commitment and focus remain absolute.
That single, unwavering decision.
That choice, that commitment, according to this philosophy, that's the first step. That's
Yep.
the spark that begins to awaken the giant within.